Not many people are in the mood to take the Tories seriously when it comes to their proposed anti-strike laws. This week, Business Secretary Grant Shapps appeared on the News Agents podcast to defend them. This is what happened.
If you have the highest category problems, so someone having a heart attack or perhaps broken bones, stroke, it seems proper, and indeed is done elsewhere, that you should still be able to get an ambulance in that situation. Countries like France and Germany, Spain, Italy, and elsewhere already have minimum safety levels in place. In fact, we're the outlier for not having those.
Can I just delicately point out the flaw in the argument is that at the moment, you can't get an ambulance. You can't get health workers. You can't get beds in hospitals. There's no point in suggesting that it's the strikes that are causing this problem. It's not. It's the shortages. That's why the strikes are happening, because, quite frankly, the staff can't cope as it is. Honestly, Grant, it's not lists, though. It's not waiting times. It's literally having to spend the night on your floor because the ambulance doesn't come because there aren't enough people, having to sit in a hospital car park or on a hospital chair because you haven't got enough people there. These aren't like operation waiting times where you might be able to go about your daily life. These are literally A&E desperate times.
The Tories, when it comes to policy, are now operating at kind of two levels. You saw this also, by the way, with the Rishi Sunak maths proposal. So speculatively, here's this law and we want to do X. But if you want to do that, it means you're going to have to effectively break with what is the reality. So we want to have compulsory mathematics teaching for everybody till 18. Now, you can agree or disagree with that. We don't have the maths teachers to do it. There is not the state capacity to do it. We want to guarantee a certain minimum with regards to, A&E and paramedic services and the NHS. We don't do that anyway. So it's a really strange moment, Michael, where you have on the one level, the sort of speculative legislation, and then just the reality where people are waiting for hours and hours for ambulances on days that there aren't strikes already. I think I mentioned it at the tail end of last year, Michael. I spoke to a woman recently who had a Marpic pregnancy. She could have died, and she was found by her husband just bleeding. And she called an ambulance and it hadn't arrived after hours and hours and hours. This is the reality for millions of people. I mean, millions of people aren't getting an ambulance every year, but you can be pretty sure, sadly, that everybody basically has to rely on A&E services once every 5-10 years, even young, healthy, extremely healthy people such as yourself, Michael. So this is the reality for millions of people. The further we go into Tory government, which is absolutely committed to underfunding and under-resourcing the NHS, it is kind of surreal. It is kind of surreal for them to be talking in these terms when the infrastructure is just collapsing. It's in freefall, particularly since COVID. I mean, particularly since 2010, all of the preceding trends before that, after 2020 rather, all the preceding trends before that after 2010 were obviously very bad, but then something has just put it on steroids after 2020 with regards to labour supply, with regards to all manner of things. And you see this in area after area with regards to public services, and it's collapsing. I think personally, this whole charade is just really short-term and about taking the wind out of the sails of trade unions and workers who are now clearly gathering momentum in their struggle for higher wages. It's about PR. It's about short-termism. In other words, it's everything that the Conservatives now stand for when it comes to running the country.
Pat Cullen, who's the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nurses, so they're one group of people who will be affected if these laws go through. She was saying, look, we've been asking for mandatory minimum service levels for years, right? Because they've been saying, look, our nurses are working in dangerous situations. There should be some kind of law whereby, this number of patients have to be staffed by this number of nurses. But you've always refused to do that. And now you want to introduce it purely only in these particular circumstances when we go on strike. So you're only interested in a minimum service if that can discipline us and the wage demands we make. No other time do they care or they give a damn about minimum services. We can see that across every public service in the country. If there were laws about minimum services, then the law would be being broken every day.
Yeah, and I think there was data around this, Michael. I think basically you only have adequately staffed nurses, I think 25% of the time at the moment. So basically 3 out of every 4 shifts, there are inadequate numbers of nurses. We are short in this country approximately 50,000 nurses already. So like you say, the default within the NHS is a substandard level of care. And If there's going to be a legal obligation to a certain minimum, then great. Okay, let's apply this to both sides. I mean, look at any waiting times when it was Labour, and we're very critical of Tony Blair and New Labour, quite rightly so. But when you look at things like the commitment to waiting in an A&E for 4 hours or less, it was basically 100% by 2010. Again, that's in freefall. Who pays for that? Who's accountable for that? Who's responsible for that when it comes to government? When it comes to completely butchering standards in the National Health Service, you can't blame workers for that. And I think the reality is, again, I said they're operating at the level of speculation and then reality. Another reality is you have a staffing crisis. You have very few incentives at the moment to actually get new staff members. And into the falling wages, they've seen their wages fall by 10% since 2010, nurses. It's going to be another 10% by the end of next year. So you're looking at, and that's the best case. There's some nurses actually significantly worse off than that. Into the falling real wages, into the fact that you've got the average nurse now graduates with £54,000 worth of debt. On top of that, you're saying, you know what, you don't have the right to strike. You don't have the right to strike. So you're going to see your real wages fall every year. They're 20% lower than they were in 2010. You've got £54,000 worth of student debt. You can't find affordable housing. You can't get on the mortgage ladder. And you know what? You can't do anything about it either. Is that really going to be a positive impetus for people to say, you know what? I'm going to join the NHS as a nurse? I really don't think so. We should be thinking about incentives for people to take on these vocations because they're critically necessary for society. Again, Michael, this whole level of abstraction that Tories are now operating on, the fundamental reality is we don't train enough healthcare professionals in this country. We haven't done that for more than a decade. So they can talk about targets and, press releases and percentages and legal obligations. You can't run a public healthcare system. By the way, it doesn't need to be NHS. It can be European style, mixed model. It can be US style privatized healthcare. None of these models work if you don't have enough nurses and doctors. Madness, Michael, madness. Now, we've said that about the Tories for a very long time, but in 2022 in particular, and now in 2023, this is no way to run a country.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how this is all combined with a service which is understaffed? Because, if you think about, the big disputes between sort of Labour and the government, Labour is in organised Labour, not the Labour Party. Think about the miners' strike, for example. So what they were trying to attack the workforce in coal mines because they wanted to get rid of the coal industry, right? The whole point was they thought the coal industry was overstaffed. So they wanted to make a load of them redundant. It didn't matter from the Tory perspective if you completely demoralised these people because you wanted them to leave anyway. If they all turned around and said, oh, we quit, whatever, they'd say, great, job done. Everyone seems to admit, I hope everyone admits we need an education service. We need a health service. And all of these sectors are completely understaffed. And the response from the government has been to go to war with the workforce. Like there's something that doesn't quite add up there.